Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain. I am one of your hosts, John Dyer, and with me is Dr. Mohamed Saleh, and we're here to continue talking about coaching. We started this discussion in our last podcast and talked about the why of coaching, and today we're going to talk more about the how of coaching. But before we get started, last episode, like I said, we talked about the why of coaching and about the triangle organizational structure and how under the current leadership model, literally leaders begin to become jealous of the team's success, and it takes the spotlight off of them, which then doesn't allow them to get promoted. Well, just this past week, since we recorded that episode, what we discussed last time came to fruition. A person who attended one of my workshops last year, who had been in the continuous improvement world for a little over a year and was a leader in the company they represented, had been making some really great gains. In fact, the people were starting to really get won over. It was a union facility. The union leadership was starting to get on board. They started forming their teams and having some successes. And then about 2 weeks ago, they had a major success that the continuous improvement leader put on social media, and it was amazing what they had accomplished. And a lot of the comments were things like, "Way to go, team. What an awesome group of people that is." And then just last week, the continuous improvement department was disbanded and the continuous improvement leader was let go. And it's just, again, amazes me how often this cycle keeps repeating itself. So we've got to break out of that cycle. We've got to redefine. We used to call them managers, then we started calling them leaders. Now we need to start really calling them coaches so that they can share with the team's success, but they also have a lot of work to do to develop the teams. And that should be their primary objective instead of trying to get themselves promoted. So this episode's critically important into how we do this. So Mohamed, why don't you start us off with, what does it take to really be a good coach?
Yeah, you brought up the importance of reducing that power index and the hierarchy. And we talked about, in this domain of change, many leadership characteristics that I feel are really intertwined into a weave that you can't really do one without the other. We talked about respect for people and the importance of that. We talked about selfless leadership and the importance of that. And we talked about an array of different characteristics that are all needed for change. In the last episode, like you highlighted, we talked about the importance of leaders being good coaches. And in that, we really talked and dove into the purpose and the why you need to do that. Well, for that to come to life or for that to be exemplified, there's multiple vehicles that fall into one's ability to be a good coach. But before I go into those things, I think it is critical that the leader is willing to give up their cape. I don't think you could go into what we're going to talk about today unless you're able to retire that cape and go beyond being a hero. If you're unable to do that, really what I have to say and what we'll be talking about, John, I don't think is really applicable. If one is willing to give up their cape and have their team become the heroes and they become behind the curtain, I think there's validity in what we're going to talk about. I want to talk about six today. The first one, vehicle or technique, first technique for coaching and developing others is an official one-on-one development session for each individual. Those are regular check-ins that are very intentional in nature. And they're not status checks. I know in the last episode we talked a little bit about status checks and the importance of it not being a status check, but about developing capabilities. This one is really about intentional and going into it with the focus on the person, not the task. So I'm just going to say that one more time, not the person, and going in for the person and not the task. So you have to see the person. Does this person need technical capability building? Does this person need a potential from a behavioral, emotional intelligence, some of the soft skills? Do they need that? Or is it more problem solving? They need capability building around. And so the approach I have used in this technique is to be very use open-ended questions. And to promote two things, to either promote reflection and or to promote ownership. So in this one-on-one session, the coachee has to walk away with full ownership, can't be the coach. They have to be able to walk out of it with a deep reflection. And that's the goal. That's how you win as a coach, if that person does those two things. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that that's very important. But imagine doing that with everyone in the organization, including the frontline workers.
Yeah.
You know, how often do you take employees that are working on the production lines or in a hospital, those who are, you know, directly working with patients, and actually pulling them into your office and saying, you know, hey, what are your needs? You know, where do you want to go as a future career path? So I think it's important, again, as we continue to building these teams, building trust, it's important to get to know all the workers, all the employees on a deeper level.
Yeah. And before I go on to the next technique, you just said something that prompted me. If someone says, I can't do one-on-one coaching with someone, intentional one-on-one coaching sessions with someone because I have too many people, I have 70 people that report to me. I can't coach all of them. That's a different problem. That's a span of control issue. And so you shouldn't just say, I'm not going to coach anyone because of that. There is a problem that you have to solve here. So if you're unable to do that, you need to address that problem. Maybe you coach 7 or 8 people and they become your assistant coaches that are able to then coach others as well. But to say, I'm not going to coach because I have too many people, I think that defeats the purpose.
Right.
The second technique is, I think many of us have gone down this path before, and it's very highly promoted in the lean world, is on-the-job training. I think it's critical that you have real-time feedback during actual work. During meetings, get feedback right after it. During a huddle, get feedback after it. The leader could do Gemba walks and give feedback like right there in their real time. Even during A3 reviews or A3 progress, being able to give real-time feedback. That is not intentional coaching where you carve out time for that individual, which is focused on their growth. But this is one to say, the stuff that we talked about, how are they applying? Hey, we talked about you being in the moment and being a better listener. We talked about you being more curious so that you don't fall into judgment. Now on the job, I'm going to be observing for that to see how you're doing in real life. So on the job training is really where the fun's at. And it's a very powerful coaching technique. Thoughts?
Yeah, you know, It's interesting because a lot of people don't know that at Toyota, as an example, they don't have necessarily a formal lean Toyota production system training process for new frontline workers. They talk a lot about how new employees, it's all on the job training. So it's their peers, their teams that are basically sharing the knowledge of TPS real time with them as they're working. The other thing that kind of hit my mind there is that people are very afraid to give feedback. We tend to gloss over all the positive comments and end up focusing just on the negative comments. We all do that. So
Yeah.
it's important, right, to not only give positive comments, but when you do give the negative side, to make it more uplifting. Like, hey, the next time try this, or these are the areas that I know you can do a little better in if you just stretch yourself, or, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. Those kinds of comments versus, oh, you stink at this, or, or it's really, really negative. So keep it positive, even on the improvement feedback comments.
Yeah, what a good point. My sensei, John, would always ask me, like, what are some of the weaknesses on your team? And I've been worked in many organizations. Well, just as an example, one of them was not blaming one another. Being curious versus judgmental was really a behavior. So he would ask me, hey, when you did your gimbal walks, how many people did you acknowledge, recognize, and reinforce the behavior of curiosity today? Go out there and, okay, if the desired behavior is people being more curious, okay, how many people did you recognize for that today? And so he wouldn't say how many people are judgmental. He would say, go reinforce the behavior that you desire over and over on the job, because that is also a form of feedback by reinstilling something that you value.
Right.
That's a really good point. The third one, which is a little different than one-on-one coaching, which is really about personal reflection. On the job coaching, which is really about reflecting together as the teacher or as the coach and the coachee. Mentorship is more of is a third technique, which is really focused on long-term development. So in this platform of long-term development, I'm not looking at the individual for like the next 6 months or the next year. I'm looking at them based on our initial one-on-one coaching session. What does this person want to be? So if I'm coaching an operator and their goal is to be the director of ops, and that is something they're aspiring to. Okay, so there might be a 7-year roadmap for this person or a 5-year roadmap for this person, depending on the situation that you're in. Who could they get mentored by so that they could, it doesn't even have to be me as the coach. It could be someone else. Sometimes it's better that it's someone else that could take them under their wing so that they could experience the future state of what that looks like. And so this is really about someone who's willing to dump all their experience onto someone. So we call it experience transfer coaching, or wisdom sharing. And a lot of times it's better that this type of coaching is someone outside of the hierarchy because it's less threatening that way. But it is a technique, and it's a very powerful technique, having mentorship. That could be an organic cultural mentorship or an official program where, here's the future of general managers. We're going to put them through a mentorship program where each person gets a GM that they could adopt and become their official mentors.
Right. Yeah. And I think mentorship programs are critically important. But now imagine taking that concept to the team level. Imagine every team having a mentor. And again, I agree with you. Someone outside of the normal hierarchy, someone who may not even be part of that department, but is sitting down with the team periodically saying, okay, what additional skills do you need as a team? Where do you want to go in the future, and what can we do to help you be more successful and to thrive more in your department. I think the same techniques that you would use one-on-one could be applied to a team of people as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I've put together mentorship programs for lean individuals around the world. And, I have people that are in the anthropology world and people that are in the philosophy world and people that are in the psychology world. So it's not all industrial, people in the healthcare world. And the goal here is that there's a agreement on my end to mentor them and a need for them to ask, where a lot of times leader in the chain of command, they have to coach those that they lead. There's no choice. You don't choose if you're going to develop the people that you lead or not. But a mentor, you choose. It's a very intentional person that you go seek and say, could you mentor me on this? So that there is an acknowledgement that I take full accountability, that I'm going to be transferring my experience to you. And you take full responsibility to be able to have the discipline to stick with it. And which is a little bit different than the hierarchy structure. The fourth one, technique, and for some of our listeners, this doesn't usually come with love, is stretch assignments or job rotations, making the uncomfortable become comfortable. That technique of making the uncomfortable become comfortable is the people that are under your chain of command, the ones that you have committed your life to be able to develop, or your time to be able to develop and grow. Are you observing them to the point to understand when have they become comfortable in what they do to start making them uncomfortable? And the reason I'm using this term is I remember one of my greatest coaches that I've had in my career. He would talk to me about how comfortable I am with certain skills. And he never made me feel comfortable, ever. I actually, for many situations, I would go home hating this guy. But I'm proud to say he was the best coach I've ever had in my life. He's the one, when I think of who I want to be when I grow up, he is the guy that comes to mind all the time, because he always made me feel uncomfortable, but I grew so much under his leadership. But it was such an art. He never set me up to fail. I got to the point where I knew I was on the edge that I could fall, but I knew he would catch me if I did. But he never gave me that safety blanket. Like, he always just made me a little bit anxious because it's uncomfortable ground. And then the second he found out that I'm comfortable, even without me saying anything, he added something to make me feel a little bit more uncomfortable. But when I look back, I grew under this person's leadership more than anyone else. But it was that job rotation. Okay, you lack operations, I'll give you 5 offices to manage. Okay, you lack influence, I'm going to take power away from you so that you could only lead through influence. And so every time he knew me inside out, but also I found myself not becoming a mirror of him, which is a very important thing, but just being able to flourish in my strengths and be able to mitigate some of my weaknesses. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's critically important. I remember at General Electric, I went through their manufacturing management program for 2 years, and it was 4 6-month assignments in 2 different plants in 2 different locations.
Yeah.
For me, it was one in Illinois and one in Vermont. So talk about getting a heavy dose of dealing with change and stretch assignments. And I remember one of the 4 assignments had to be a supervisor on the shop floor, and that was always a difficult thing to just jump into, fresh out of college and not knowing what you're doing. But I learned the most by far during those 6 months. One other quick thing on this is that I remember going into a factory one time where they were constantly changing everything. I mean, constantly moving equipment, moving production lines, and so forth. And I got a chance to speak to some of the frontline workers, and I'm like, wow, how do you deal with all this change? And they were like, well, at first it was difficult, but now we're used to it. And in fact, we embrace it. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Why do you embrace it? I would think that you'd want to get some stability and settle down. And they said, no, and this was to a person. Everyone I talked to said this. They said, if we stop changing, we're dying. So the only way to keep growing, to keep improving, to reaching excellence is to constantly be changing.
Yeah.
And if we're not changing, we're dying. And I was like, wow, that's very, very cool. So it almost becomes a cultural characteristic that every organization needs to be able to stretch everyone and make everyone feel uncomfortable. And after a while, they get used to it, and then they start embracing it, and then they start recognizing that, hey, this is the only way we're going to stay on top.
Yeah, yeah. And it makes then now the task is being done differently. It becomes a new stretch assignment, it becomes a new job rotation, and the whole cycle starts over again.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. So those are, I would say, I'm not gonna say the top four, but those are four main techniques. There's two other techniques that I want to visit in this podcast, and one of them is shadowing. In some publications, it's shadowing and reverse shadowing, and others it's just both called shadowing. And that is the coachee gets to experience a day in the life or a week in the life of the person that's coaching them, so they could understand the reality of that individual, and follow that person's experience. There's a lot to be learned when you're in the meetings, understanding exactly what's going on. Then there's the reverse coaching, where the leader, who's the coach, is going to shadow the individual they're coaching to be able to experience this, like the life of that individual as well. And you see many senseis would job shadow the people the people that they're coaching, and they'll be out there experiencing the entire sometimes week or 2 weeks or a month, just to kind of understand what is the capabilities they're dealing with, what are the quality of the questions they're asking, how are they leading with their teams, so that they could better coach by being in the Gimba with them and being able to experience it. I do think both are equally important. Being able to shadow the person that you want to be when you grow up and be able to go into that person's shoes. But I also feel it's very powerful to have real-time feedback by the person actually understanding your separate reality. What's your thoughts on that?
Very good. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's important. And again, that takes time. And if I'm constantly putting out fires, I don't have the time to do those kinds of things. But if I let the teams deal with the fires, now that frees me up to be a better coach, a better mentor, and to do the shadowing. I think that's critically important.
It is. It is. And so the last technique, there's many techniques. I'm just picking the top 6 right now. The last technique is, I would call it under the umbrella of leader standard work. And a lot of times when people think leader standard work, they think of an accountability process. Now, David Mann, for example, he highlighted in his book, Leader Centered Work as an accountability process. And I do agree with that. There is a place for that. But here I'm talking about as a characteristic, leaders being able to have discipline, and being able to observe those they coach have discipline. So modeling high performance, but also observing that high performance through being able to shadow or monitor that individual on the job. But this is moving away from accountability. This coaching is really intended on understanding habits of those individuals. How do they tick when they're under pressure? Like understanding what that habit looks like. Rituals or routines, how are they routines going? So when they're doing an employee round, are they doing it with the intention to respect every individual? Are they doing it with the intention of leading with humility? Or are they just doing it because it's a routine? And so be able to get into the leader standard work to be able to coach it through that routine, and also understand their mindset. Are they like a team over self mindset or a self over team mindset? And being able to dissect the leader standard work. And so as the coach, having a leader standard work that actually goes out and being able to understand the habits and the routines and the mindsets of the people that you coach, I think is important. And I think it needs to be consistent. And that also could include things like 360-degree feedbacks to measure the success of that leader standard work. It could also include like peer-to-peer feedback on a consistent basis and making that a routine as part of your leader standard work. But I do think as a leader, one of your main characteristics is to show that you care and that show that you have discipline. And by doing that, you're able to bake in those coaching sessions and weave those other 5 together.
Yeah. Very good. I agree. That's a great summary of coaching. Like you said, there's so much more we could get into. Our next podcast, we've gone through now 10 leadership characteristics. Our next podcast is we'll do a summary of those 10. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Until then, we'll see you again. Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everyone. Take care, John, and take care, everyone.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.